schools. Apparently, children of primary school age can be, get this, mixed berry, gender fluid muffins. What on earth is going on in this world? Sometimes, honestly, I do despair, but maybe I'm out of touch. I don't know, you tell me. Get in touch with me because, as always, tonight is not just about us three, it's very much about you at home as well. Get in touch with us on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me if that's your thing, at GBNews. But before we get into all of it, shall we just take a moment to bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines?
Michelle, thank you. The top story on GB News tonight. The Prime Minister has said it's the right thing to do, to take steps that are necessary to protect ourselves against the likes of China. Rishi Sunak made the comments in San Diego after the government pledged £5 billion over 2 years to the armed forces. He also met his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, ahead of unveiling a major new AUKUS defence pact between the UK, the United States and Australia. Plans to be announced with President Joe Biden include supplying nuclear-powered subs to Australia. And ahead of that meeting, Mr Sunak praised the current relationship between the United Kingdom and America.
China is a country that does have different values to ours. It poses a systemic challenge and its behaviour is concerning. More authoritarian at home, more assertive overseas. And in light of that, it's right that we take the steps that are necessary to protect ourselves. Our relationship with America economically is very strong. Our exports are growing massively anyway, and we are concluding agreements with states. Remember, many American states are as big as most countries, and actually increasing our economic ties at a state level is something that can be really good for Britain and good for jobs, and so we're getting on and doing that.
Well, in news here at home, 3 people have been taken to hospital after a suspected gas explosion in South Wales, with 1 person unaccounted for. Emergency services are at the scene in Swansea after being called to the Morriston area this morning. Police say 2 properties have been extensively damaged and neighbouring buildings have also been affected. They've set up a cordon and are asking the public to avoid the area. Local council leader Rob Stewart told GB News teams are working hard to secure the site.
You're in the street here, you can certainly smell gas in terms of, the remembrance of the explosion. It's also disturbed the electricity supply in the area. This looks like a localized incident. And, certainly the area of Morriston is a modern area, and there's no suggestion of any sort of infrastructural issues at the present time.
As you've been hearing, TV presenter Gary Lineker has been reinstated to presenting Match of the Day after reaching an agreement with the BBC. That's after he was taken off air over a tweet on the government's illegal migration bill. The BBC Director General has apparently apologised and said the corporation is launching an independent review of its social media guidelines. The board has welcomed the move, saying impartiality is a cornerstone of the BBC. Speaking to the BBC, Director General Tim Davies said he took proportionate action.
I've always said we needed to take proportionate action. For some people, by the way, we've taken too severe action, David. Others think we're being too lenient. One of the joys of this affair is there'd never been an easy solution, but asking Gary to step back off air was, I think, a significant thing. And now we look forward with this agreement moving forward to resolve things and get back to business as usual.
Junior doctors have staged their first of 3 days of industrial action as they mounted picket lines outside hospitals. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms pay cut since 2008. The union saying newly qualified medics earn just over £14 an hour. That's less, they say, than some baristas in coffee shops. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says their demands of a 35% rise are unaffordable. Now, King Charles and other members of the royal family have attended a service celebrating Commonwealth Day at Westminster Abbey. His Majesty focused his speech on the theme of forging a sustainable and peaceful common future. The annual reception is now being held at Buckingham Palace. King Charles said a commitment to peace, progress and opportunity will sustain the Commonwealth.
Let ours be a Commonwealth that not only stands together, but strives together in restless and practical pursuit of the global common good.
More news in an hour. Now more from Michelle.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, I am Michelle Dewbs and I am keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, Charlotte Pickles is the director of the Reform think tank and Aaron Bastani is the founder of Novara Media. Welcome, both of you. They're confusing me tonight, ladies and gents at home, because I've got the person that would normally lean left sitting on my right, so the person that would perhaps lean right sitting on my left. Maybe you might give me interesting opinions because there is at least one topic tonight. And sometimes when I think, I bet he or she thinks that or thinks this, there's at least one topic that I am aware of where actually they very much confuse me, surprise me with their views. It makes me wonder whether or not the whole kind of traditional left or right thing is even as much of an issue or a thing as it was once upon a time, or has life moved on from all of that. Get in touch with me, let me know your thoughts. You know the drill anyway, don't you? The usual ways, email and Twitter. I was pondering at the start of the programme whether or not I was losing my mind or if the world is going mad. Keith has been in touch saying, I'm not losing my mind and the world is going mad and he's with me and that makes me happy, Keith, because as long as you're there, at least, you know, if there's one more, not just me, I'll never be alone. So that's nice, isn't it? Right, let's get into our top story then, shall we? Because you might have noticed junior doctors are on strike. And it's all got a little bit nasty, I have to say, because they're down tools this morning for 3 days. Now, if you missed the start of the programme, you're not aware of this story, you'll be sitting there thinking, what's it all about? Well, the answer is pay. How much pay they get this? Not 5 or 10 or 15%. No, they want a 35% pay rise. You did hear that correct, 35% in order to get it and to convince the government of their argument, Aaron. They've withdrawn themselves from lots of the emergency care that they would have perhaps in previous strikes have provided cover for. Where do you stand on the whole thing?
Well, I feel like junior doctors in particular have had a very bad deal with regards to public service wages falling over the last 13 years. So, as perhaps your audience has heard or seen, the average junior doctor now is earning in their first year around £14 an hour, obviously incredibly low. And if you're living in a major city like London, Manchester, renting, very high costs, we're in a situation now where many junior doctors live in conditions that actually would be, frankly, beneath a university student. And it's deeply concerning. So they're asking for 35%. There's not that many of them, so the context there is that it would cost around £2 billion. So that's what's on the table now. Bear in mind,
casual $2 billion.
Well, we've just
With a burr? Did you say with a burr?
We've just given the French 500 million. You know, so.
Did you say billion with a burr? Or
I said with a burr, yeah. So
right,
it is a significant amount of money. But when you think we've just increased defence spending by £5 billion, given the French 500 million, there's clearly money to go around. And of course, we found out last month, actually, we've got 30 billion more than we realised in tax receipts ahead of the budget. So there is money to play with. I know lots of people want that money, but there is money to play with. And I think, frankly, junior doctors, and I must say nurses, I think should be at the front of the queue when it comes to actually looking after some people.
This, I mean, lots that I can pick up on there, but just a quick question just about your economic viewpoint. So when you talked about the surplus then, so I agree with you, the government have got receipts that they weren't perhaps expecting. See, I would think actually the right thing to do with that money is if you've got yourself into a financial conundrum and then you end up with a little bit of extra income, rather than splashing the cash wherever, I would actually think it's more fiscally responsible to sit there and go, fantastic, I don't need to now perhaps borrow so much to get myself out of the mess that I'm in. So I wouldn't be spending that surplus. I'd be keeping hold of it and not borrowing as much. Wouldn't you agree?
To an extent, I think you could do a lot with 30 billion. I would say let's have a temporary time-limited cut to VAT, for instance. But we have a major problem with doctors in this country, and I think we're 10,000 doctors short. We have a big problem with recruitment, and this is particularly interesting and particularly bad because the taxpayer spends hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not millions of pounds, frankly, on a doctor. They enter the profession. Now, of course, after 10 or 15 years in the profession, they earn lots of money. Nobody's saying that consultants don't earn lots of money. But before then, they're junior doctors. They have very tough schedules. They don't earn very much. And they have the incentive to go to the US, Australia, or elsewhere. So we're training people and then losing out on them. And it's a big problem, and the government has to have an answer for it.
Again, I want to come back on some of those things, but before I do, Charlotte, your thoughts?
I think walking out straight off the bat for 3 full days, no other striking sector has done this. The nurses started off with 12-hour strikes. So to start off straight off the bat with 3 days, no emergency cover, Michelle, as you said, no cover in maternity wards, all of these wards and areas that junior doctors are absolutely crucial to. I mean, something like half of the doctors in the NHS are junior doctors. So this is a huge impact on the NHS's ability to provide core health services. But let's just for one moment reflect on what they're walking out for. A 35% pay bump, 35%. And how have they got to that figure? They've used a measure called RPI, which is a measure of inflation, which our national statistics agency in this country say is discredited and you shouldn't use. So actually, if you look at what the figure is...
But they would push back and say, yeah, but hang on, that's just politicking, because when it suits the government for things like, I don't know, train fare increases, etc., they reckon, the BMA reckons that the government do use that RPI.
The government don't use. So it may be that external bodies use it. The government does not use RPI. The government uses CPI. And if you were to take CPI, yeah, the junior doctors have seen a significant real terms decrease in the value of their salary, but nowhere close to 35%. So I think it is irresponsible to say we want 35% and we're going to walk out for 3 days without providing cover unless you give us 35%. I also do just want to reflect...
If you look at CPI and you use that same starting point...
Which takes about 10 to 14% for junior doctors.
Yeah, 16%, I think.
It ranges, because junior doctors, their average junior doctor salary, so again, it's quite clever putting it in per hour, but the year one, the foundation year one, which is what a junior doctor starts with, the average amount they actually earn is about £37,000, which is more than the national average. And that's NHS data that can give you that. The top end of when you're still a junior doctor, which is several years, so foundation one, and then you do several years, is about £63,000. And then after that, you become a consultant. So not in that massive amount of time, if you think about how most people's earning potential goes. And NHS consultants are in the top 2% earners in the country. So I think there'll be people sitting out there watching this tonight who are thinking, gosh, that sounds like quite high salaries to me. And hold on a minute, they want 35% in a cost of living crisis, when actually this idea that there is 30 billion, when Aaron says 30 billion, that's what in technical terms is called fiscal headroom. What does that mean? It just means you're going to borrow less than 30 billion. It doesn't mean you have 30 billion. It's still magic money tree money. It's not there.
Well, it's there for defence spending. It's not there for this. So it is there.
Yes, there is money, and you always have to make trade-offs within this, right? But the idea that there's a 30 billion pot that we can just chunk up and hand out to different services. So, OK, so we give 2 billion to junior doctors, which actually is, they're asking for it immediately, whereas defence is over a certain number of years, as is the 500 million to France, is my understanding that's over several years. They're also, I mean, if you think about for defence and national security, I think most people would say, given the geopolitics at the moment, there probably is a sensible case to be made that we need to increase the amount we're spending to keep the country safe.
I would completely disagree.
Which is what the government would argue is also on illegal immigration. Oh, no, I totally agree on that. Procurement is terrible. No, we can definitely agree on that.
I think we should increase military spending, but increasing military spending when the procurement is awful, no business would accept it. If the kind of procurement we have in the MOD, and parliamentarians of all parties are on record saying this.
I totally agree with you on that.
So throwing more money at that just seems so daft, and we've got doctors... The figure I heard is £29,000, but...
That's the base salary, if you look at the NHS data itself, because the 29,000, and then if you do exactly what you've described, you do on-call, you do weekend working, you do London waiting, you won't find a junior doctor that is getting that. So the NHS's data says on average a year one is 37,000.
How much should they get then as a pay rise?
I would say, so I don't know. I'm not sitting there working out the government figures in the NHS. They obviously aren't just talking about junior doctors, you're talking about nurses, and I think it's a really good case that we should be being as generous as we can be to nurses. I would have suggested that junior doctors... I'm sympathetic to the idea that we do need to see a decent bump for junior doctors. But I don't think 35% comes anywhere close to being a decent bump.
So, to be clear, I actually do think that NHS staff do deserve a pay rise. I absolutely do. for the record, because I always do get in trouble for being heartless, which I'm not, I think they should get a pay rise. But I think that 35% is fantasy land. And I actually think that it's counterproductive to negotiations as opposed to productive in terms of making a step forwards, Aaron. This whole £14 thing that's been bandied around, I think is quite interesting. Charlotte says it's quite clever. I find it quite disingenuous, the messaging around it, actually, because what they're doing is they're going out into the media and saying, look at the salary of a junior nurse and then compare it to a barista at Pret-a-Manger. So I can earn more pouring cups of coffee than I can being a junior doctor. But I find the comparison very disingenuous because
I'd agree with that.
A doctor is supposed to be a vocation. When you look at the NHS, the perks, the progression, the top earnings that you can get, so I don't find it clever. I think it's a bit disingenuous and it turns me off from the cause as opposed to onto it. What do you think they should get?
I'd agree. I agree in precisely with that, actually, I have to say. You're right. There are many advantages for working in the NHS and becoming a doctor. There's a reason why young people get £100,000 debt to become a qualified doctor, of course. But we have a problem right now in this country with regards to, and I'm answering your question, by the way, in terms of getting from a student to a junior doctor to a senior doctor because they're leaving the country. And it's similar to me, it's analogous to apprentices.
Who's leaving the country, though? Because even that I would query, because...
There's significant numbers now of UK health professionals go to the Australia and the United States because, they don't have to pay the student debt, although it's accumulating interest, but they don't have to pay it, and they're earning more money, particularly nurses. It's a very alluring professional landscape over there. They're earning a lot more money.
And Australia had a trade week, I think, was it last week, the week before, whatever, when they proactively was trying to get our staff. What about if you made training to be a doctor or a nurse free, and then, but there was a caveat, and you're locked in, you're retained to the NHS, so at the moment you step foot in Australian soil to work there or wherever, then you become liable instantly for whatever percentage of those debts. What about doing it that way?
I don't know if it's legal under international labour law, but I think something like that.
Free tuition fee.
I think it sounds. No, I think what you're saying sounds fair, right? There's a trade-off where we'll really look after you, and you look after the general public later on. But it's a bit like with apprentices, right? It's all well and good to say to somebody you'll be a boiler fitter or electrician, you're on £60,000-70,000 a year. But if it's a 20-year-old kid and they're on £4.50 an hour, it's quite hard for them to make a sensible decision.
The apprentice is absolutely right and is no way comparable to the amount of money that a junior doctor is getting.
It's about deferring income, isn't it? Oh, I can wait 5-10 years and then it'll be OK.
But they're not waiting 5 or 10 years. So year one is £37,000. That is not what an apprentice is getting.
In London, if they all the add-ons
it's going to be not far off. So the London waiting is, what, like a couple of grand or something? You're still talking more than the national average salary for people in this country, i.e. the vast majority of people in this country are earning less than a year one junior doctor. And within a few years, they can get to the...
Like, they're a little bit less skilled. Don't mean to be rude if you're not a doctor.
So I think that is a really good point, and it's why I would disagree, actually, with the idea that we should give free tuition. So doctor training is heavily subsidised. You're absolutely right. They do come out with a lot of debt. They're also massively subsidised by taxpayers to do this training. So there's an argument, I think, regardless of whether they're making a contribution to their training, to tie them in, because taxpayers, those people who aren't going to have the same earnings potential, the people who don't go to university, half of the population, are funding for these people to get the sort of training that gets them into the top 2% of earners in this country within a few years. So actually, I think, I agree, we should increase for junior doctors, as we should for nurses, but I think we have to be sensible and reasonable about the position they're in.
I'll tell you someone that's not being subtle in his view, my view of Paul. He says, fire the lot of them. And then if anyone dies as a direct result of this strike, charge them with manslaughter. But if you fired them, Paul, and then someone dies because there's no staff, then wouldn't it be you that would be getting charged with manslaughter, not the union? I think there's a wee flaw in your plan there, although I understand your sentiment. Sam says, I had a telephone consultation with a consultant cancelled because of the strike. It's now being rearranged for October. This is ridiculous. Val says, I think it's absolutely appalling that these doctors need to go on strike. You're very much in support of those doctors. John says they may have a low starting salary, but they certainly make up for it later on, unlike the role that they're comparing themselves to. Yeah, the Pret role. By the way, the comparison that they use, that has like an added bonus on it, like a mystery shopper bonus or something like that, using the comparison that they added. I've got another question. You guys can both answer it for me in a couple of minutes, not yet. The whole removing of the emergency care. I have to say, and I get abused for my position, but I've got thick skin, so I don't mind. Do you think it's right? Don't tell me now, just tell me in a few minutes. You can ponder your answer. Do you think it's right that this time they've removed the emergency care? So from things like the cancer wards and A&E and all that kind of stuff. That's my question to both of you, and it is indeed my question to you at home. What about this added layer of the emergency support being removed this time? Do you agree with it or not? Also, I'll tell you what I want to ask you about. The Middle Eastern Trade Minister has said that Britain should butt out and stop lecturing foreign countries about their human rights if we want to do a trade deal. Are they right or not?
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewbs, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, this is Dewbs and Kerr, and I'm Michelle Dewbs, keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight alongside me. Charlotte Pickles is the director of the Reform think tank, and Aaron Bastani is the founder of Novara Media. Very brief, if you will, your answer to that question. Do you think it's right and fair that the doctors are removing emergency care this time?
No.
Do you?
No.
No. Ooh.
First surprise.
Surprising, everybody. I'm going to crassly categorise you as left and right. I know it's a little bit crass and probably a little bit inaccurate these days, but what I found interesting is the way, actually, that people on differing sides of the political spectrum agree these days. What did you think to it at home when I asked you that question, whether or not they're right or wrong in your mind to remove emergency care? I've got to admit, I'm going to make it a triple hits because I think, as you all know anyway, that I think that it's wrong that they remove the emergency care on these strikes. Tony says, my 26-year-old son works in a busy London hospital. By the time he's paid his £1,000 a month rent for a room, paid tax and all the rest of it, plus his 9% student debt, he is left with nothing for his 70-hour week. They are underappreciated, morale is low, and no wonder they are leaving in their droves. My son, sadly, is one of them. After 6 years of Cambridge as well, he says, what a waste. Where did he go, your son? Fascinated. Has he left the country working somewhere else, or has he left the profession, or what? I'm intrigued. To get back in touch, Tony, let me know. Richard pointing out, he says, this comparison between coffee shop workers and doctors is stupid. And you say, actually, it's very disrespectful to coffee shop workers. Is it? Keep your thoughts coming in, but anyway, I'm going to move on. Britain, do you reckon it should butt out, basically, and stop lecturing other countries about their human rights record? That is the recommendation of the Trade Minister from the United Arab Emirates. He says a potential trade deal with this country depends on Britain separating politics from economics. In other words, pack it in, get off your moral high ground and just do business. Thank you very much. Is that right?
No, I don't think so. So I think it's really important, if we're going to be a global nation, that we use the soft power that we have, and Britain still has huge amounts of soft power, but we are a very well-respected nation around the world, to call out where we think there are fundamental abuses of human rights. And, we saw, because we had the spotlight on Qatar for the Football World Cup, there was a lot of focus there on the fact that labourers had died building the stadiums, and there was a lot of abuse of workers' rights. Obviously, you think about homosexuality, you think about the treatment of women in some of these countries, it's appalling, and I think Britain should be calling that out. I think the place I would have, I suppose, a slight note of caution is that actually striking trade deals and bringing other countries into the fold by being more interconnected in terms of economies can also, though, have a really positive impact on behaviours in other countries. So I don't think you should split them out. Firstly, because I think we have a moral obligation to call out where there is terrible behaviour and abuse. But actually, I don't think we should split them out because you often get gains and progress from striking trade deals.
So before I move on, let me just push on this. So you're saying, yes, fine, call it out. But to what end? So, I don't know, would you actually go as far as saying, right, I want to do this trade deal, but your human rights behaviour is literally one of the components of this deal, and if you don't fix it, I'm not doing business with you. So would you actually go to that level, or would you just sit there and go, right, I've said something at a meeting about human rights things, I've ticked that box, I feel good about myself, move on?
So I think this is really interesting because Labour are talking about their trade platform at the moment as being a tool to do exactly that. So essentially, you would do the trade negotiations and whatever you want to have as tariffs or free trade or whatever it looks like, the goods and services that you're willing to trade on the bilateral basis. But you require then certain standards around workers' rights, employment laws, etc., which actually is not an unfamiliar thing in trade legislation because you want to try and create a sort of level playing field. I honestly, Michelle, I don't know where the line should fall in that. And I guess there'll be different cases with different countries, depending on the state of the abuses in those countries. But I think there is an opportunity to use trade to open up economies, open up other countries, and to try and raise standards.
But at what price, I guess, is the question. Aaron, your thoughts?
Yeah, he specifically refers to, quote, toning down standard human and workers' rights provisions in trade deals. And I'm on the left, I would like workers' rights provisions in trade deals. And what was interesting, actually, with Qatar getting the World Cup is they have a system over there. It's called the kafala system, and we wouldn't really be acquainted with it in Europe. You basically have a worker over there. They're indentured. You have their passport. They can't leave. So it's not the kind of typical employment contract we would have in Europe, for instance. And one of the more interesting things about them being given the World Cup, which confirms your point, was actually a year or two before they finally hosted the event, they got rid of the kafala system. So I think that's actually an example of trade and better human and workers' rights being hand in hand with one another. And so he's kind of... I would disagree with him. I would, however, also say there's a difference between saying, we want a trade deal, but, you can't exploit child labour, right? I think most people say that's perfectly sensible. There's a difference between that and the more sort of celebrity style, calling everywhere out, finger pointing. I don't think it is particularly useful in general. But I think, you know, concrete legislative kind of demands around labour rights, labour laws, human rights in a trade agreement, I mean, it's already status quo, really. I think it's quite sensible.
One of the things, I know it's not trade related, but it is related to human rights, etc. When there was the Qatar World Cup, it did make me laugh, actually, seeing people tie themselves in knots that made out, oh, you know, I'm such a virtuous person and I am going to tell Qatar and all the rest of it exactly what I think. Simultaneously, though, I'm definitely going to take a fortune for going to Qatar. I'm definitely going to work for the Qatari state media platform. And then when it actually comes, but actually, truly, if you really cared about the goings-on, down your tools and take a stand, because as you saw at the weekend, everyone apparently was so into everything being right that they all downed tools for Gary Lineker for what he wanted to say on Twitter, but yet they didn't down tools in solidarity and all the rest of it if they felt so strongly about the so-called abuses, etc., over in Qatar. So I always find it quite interesting when people claim very much to have all of these kind of strong virtues, and then someone comes along and waves a £5 note under them and suddenly they change their minds. What do you think to all of it? Get in touch. For goodness sake, says Alan, one has to start somewhere. When you start your job, you cannot expect to earn the stack of money on day one. They're like a set of spoilt little brats. Oh, goodness me. I think it's you guys are mixed at the moment, I have to say, when it comes to the doctors and whether or not you support them or not. I absolutely want them to get pay rises. I don't want anyone to struggle, but 35%, honestly, I think you're having a bit of a laugh. David says, Michelle, I am really enjoying Dewbs and Kerr tonight. What a great panel. That's what we like to hear, isn't it? Right, Suella Braverman, did you see her earlier on, by the way, in the comments? She was not pulling any punches, was she, when she was defending that illegal migrant bill. Anyway, she has been talking to the police again, saying that they should be protecting free speech and ordering them to stop recording the names involved in so-called non-crime hate incidents. Laughable. Give me your thoughts. I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, are communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewbs, keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, Charlotte Pickles is the director of the Reform think tank, and Aaron Bastani is the founder of Novara Media. David has been in touch saying the striking junior doctors are laying themselves open to charges of manslaughter. I was just discussing that briefly in the break. You don't think that would be the case, Charlotte?
No, because the requirement is to get cover from other types of health professionals, and you have a right to strike. So I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of the legal system around striking, but I'd be very surprised if that was possible.
Well, I'll give you a little insight into my mind. I've given people strict instructions in my life that if I do die, and actually when there's an inquest or whatever into it, and it turns out that I could have been protected and saved if I'd got help and protection, etc., properly and promptly, but I didn't because of the strikes. I've made people promise, actually, that they would look into the ramifications of that and whether or not there are legal opportunities there, because how is it right? If you pay your taxes, you expect a level of service, you operate in good faith, that you live in an environment with a National Health Service, that it's not there for you in your hour of need. Maybe I'm being deluded, and I'm sure you won't hesitate to tell me if you think I am. Home Secretary Suella Braverman has ordered the police to protect free speech and stop recording the names of people involved in so-called non-crime hate incidents. Even that sentence, even that label just sounds absolutely pathetic. What is a non-crime hate incident? Well, I know what it is, but why is it even a thing? The case she mentioned, by the way, is one that I spoke about frequently here, the 14-year-old little boy, the autistic boy in Wakefield, who's had his name added to police files, apparently, for scuffing a copy of the Quran. I always ponder, by the way, I'd love to know if the people that were threatening to kill, issuing death threats to said 14-year-old child, I wonder what's happened to their police records. I wonder if they too have a little blot on it. I'd be fascinated to know the answer to that. Anyway, she says that people are perfectly entitled to say things about politics, gender and religion that other people may find offensive. That sounds common sense to me. Aaron, do you agree?
Yes, I'm not completely au fait with the legislation, but on the surface level, like you say, a non-crime hate incident sounds quite strange. My father's Iranian, I have mixed heritage. If somebody says something a little bit unsavoury about that, obviously I don't like them, I might think they're a bad person. Would I want the police to waste their time on them if it didn't have a particularly big impact on my life or my ability to earn money or go about my business? Not particularly. So,
is there a line?
Of course there's a line.
What's the line?
Point. Well, the point is that you have to criminalise what's criminal, and then what's not criminal, let people go about their business. The whole point here of a non-crime hate incident, by definition of those 4 words, should indicate the police shouldn't be involved, frankly.
And one of the things that I find utterly pathetic about all this hate crime stuff, you don't even need to be the perceived victim to be able to push for this hate crime to be recorded. So, I don't know, someone could say something awful about you, Charlotte. I could
Wouldn't
be
be the first
offended.
time.
Well, I know. Well, I can't say anything. I don't know. But I could be offended on your behalf, and I could just assume that the inclination of that person, the intention of that person was X, Y, and Z. I think it's just ludicrous.
And I think that's where Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, used this phrase, it's sort of Orwellian. And I think that it is the Orwellian part of it, the sort of trying to assume someone's intention and the way they were thinking about something and then being offended. The whole thing, I mean, you said at the start of the show, Michelle, that, is it just you or does it feel like the world's going slightly mad? And this is a great example for me of where it does feel like the world's going slightly mad. I mean, Aaron's already said it, but police should be focusing on crime, or at the very least on incidents involving really vulnerable people. You know, they do a lot around missing people, or, you know, missing children that go missing from care homes, or, you know, people who are threatening to commit suicide, or that kind of thing. That's the only non-crime type of activity that the police should be involved in, and even that, it would be better if there were other services. So the idea that they would be wasting their time following up on stuff that is not criminal and is kind of you know, someone has got offended by. I mean, you know, we were talking before about the sorts of comments that we get on social media, or you know, Aaron, you gave the example of you know, someone makes a comment to you, and you know, if we all reported those and said we thought they were based on hate, then the police would be doing nothing else with their time at all. I think it's ludicrous.
But you know, I think we are tiptoeing into an environment where we're just going to make all of this so much worse, because when you look at the young and how they are educated, trained and all the rest of it, so you go to schools, you go to universities, you have this whole notion now, I don't know, 3 kids have a race, one of them wins, whoa, you better not say that one's a winner, because then the other 2 might feel like losers. So you give them all a trying medal and that's the rest of it. You have safe spaces for people, you have trigger words for everything. I think that kind of behaviour is what is setting this society up for ludicrous things, like people crying and going to the police because they feel offended and wanting that to be criminalised. Am I wrong?
Well, they're both phenomenon. They both exist. I mean, in a way, I would say this is more insidious because it's already in the statute, but it's law, and it's being well, the police are wasting their time on these kinds of things. So, for instance, the story of the 15-year-old child, I will call him a child because he was a child, with autism who scuffed the Quran.
14-year-old in Wakefield.
14, my apologies,
yeah.
Who scuffed the Quran. You know, we talk about, because obviously social media is so immediate, we all have our smartphones, we're all on Twitter, so we go, wow, this is crazy, a whole new way of doing things, and I think there's some truth to that. But when the reality of a young boy in Wakefield is having his life destroyed, turned upside down because of scuffing a Quran, I mean, it's extraordinary. What I would say is, and it's a big point of departure from what, you know, any Conservative would say, is we need a right to freedom of speech in this country. And that's what I, as somebody on the left, would like a written constitution. People need to know their rights. And I find it strange, personally, how in this country, on the right, amongst Conservatives, freedom of speech is a big cause, and justifiably so, but they don't want to enshrine it in law, including Suella Braverman. If you care about it so much, enshrine it in law. And I think that's something the Americans really get right.
Well, this is interesting because it almost weaves me nicely, it was a nice little segue there, into the Gary Lineker thing. This 14-year-old boy in Wakefield, by the way, I'm not done with that yet, because there are rumours that this child apparently has had to leave his home. This is what's been rumoured, and it's been reported by a couple of the publications. And if indeed that is true, then that is nothing short of a national disgrace. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of that, because surely that cannot just be where the story ends, that this child gets issued with all manner of threats and has to go off and, you know, dramatically change his life, and people just shrug their shoulders and go, oh, well, let's talk about Gary Lineker instead. That's completely unacceptable. It shouldn't be permissible in this country. So I will try and get to the bottom of that, and we will revisit that. I can promise you that on another day. But the Gary Lineker thing, you've segued nicely into it. So I'll ask you this at home. Have you seen the news? I mean, it was an absolute debacle, wasn't it, over the weekend? Everyone quitting down in their microphones in solidarity with Gary Lineker. It was all just basically seems to be for nothing now, because they are going back on air this weekend almost as though nothing's happened. An investigation or a report and recommendations will be conducted to look at the social media policy of the BBC, which will cost you and I, the taxpayers, an absolute fortune. So give me your thoughts. What do you make to it all? Please tell me.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewbs, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewbs, keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, Charlotte Pickles is the director of the Reform think tank, and Erin Bastani is the founder of Novara Media. Lots of you guys getting in contact tonight. I would say that you're quite split, actually, on the junior doctors walking out. I do want to know, when you say that they should be paid fairly, what is fair to you? Because obviously they want to be paid 35% more to get their pay back in line with 2008. What they're saying, basically, they want their pay reinstated back to that point, because since then, they say it's been in decline from when you compare it to the RPI levels in this country. What do you make to that? Anyway, Lineker, we had a little segue into Lineker earlier on from Aaron, which brought me nicely onto that topic, because, of course, we went into this in depth on Friday when it was all kind of kicking off. You saw the weekend, which had kind of like quiet sport, for want of a better phrase, because everyone down their microphones in solidarity. It all basically seems like it was a complete waste of time, because they'll be reinstated at the weekend and on we go, but with a bit of a review and a recommendations into social media policies. What do you make to it all, in particular this free speech angle?
Well, it's somewhat different with the BBC, because obviously, of course, it has a commitment to impartiality. I think the bottom line here is that Tim Davie, who's the Director General of the BBC, the CEO, I think he should resign, because he introduced these guidelines in 2020, and the fundamental problem here was ambiguity. And I think what happened is they wanted to treat what Gary Lineker had written as a breach of contract, but it wasn't, because the guidelines are so ambiguous. And I think when you're the Director General, you've written those guidelines, they're not up to scratch, and then you have to basically put a stake through your coverage of the national sport for a whole weekend. I think that's your responsibility and you should go. If his predecessor had written the guidelines and he said, look, they just don't work. I wouldn't say it's on him, but I think it is on him, and I think they were sufficiently ambiguous for Gary Lineker, frankly, to get away with what he said. Now, we can talk about whether or not he should have said it. The reason why he's back in is because he hasn't breached his contract, and that's on Tim Davie.
See, he acknowledges, Tim Davie, in his statement, he actually acknowledges, he goes on about how difficult the whole period was. I mean, honestly, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but if you find, oh, I'm not going to go to work in solidarity with my mate, or I don't like what he said, if you find that a difficult period, I do think you need to get out there and experience life a bit more. But anyway, notwithstanding, that's his words, not mine. He goes on about how much of a difficult period it was, and he says the potential confusion caused by the grey areas of the BBC social media guidance that was introduced in 2020 is recognised. So to your point, he pretty much does acknowledge that grey areas is the word that he specifically used in that policy. But does that mean that he should lose his job for that?
No, I'm always... I mean, there are clearly some cases where people should just resign and, you know, there's very clear cut. I don't think that's one of these, and I'm always uncomfortable with a sort of, you know, an immediate response that says somebody should go because of, you know, a mistake that was made. We all make mistakes. You know, he's come out and said it's a grey area. Yes, he should have done a better job, absolutely. I think the whole thing has just been an absolute farce. And, you know, on the impartiality point, I am a believer in free speech, and I don't think that Gary Lineker should have, you know, I think what he said was appalling. I think, you know, the comparison between the illegal migration bill and Hitler is unacceptable. But it's offensive.
Say, I didn't mention Hitler, I mentioned...
he said 1930s Germany. I mean, who was in power then? So I think what he said was stupid and offensive and... you know, just a really ridiculous thing to say. But do I think that should mean that he was taken off air? You know, he's not reporting the news, he's not commenting on current affairs in his capacity in the BBC. He's a sports presenter. If he wants to say a stupid thing, then say a stupid thing and let people see that he said a stupid thing.
Did it offend you, what he said?
It didn't offend me, but I think, frankly, that if you're on the BBC and you're paid £1.5 million a year by the licence fee payer, you shouldn't be criticising the government because Tory voters who might support those policies are paying your wages. And I think that goes both ways. You know, there was Alan Sugar. You know, you're familiar with Alan Sugar. He was your old boss. He was criticising Jeremy Corbyn the day before the 2017 general election. That's clearly a political intervention.
But it's also before...
He shouldn't have been doing that either.
Yeah, but that was also before the 2020 new policy that came out.
Yes.
So you say that Lineker shouldn't be criticising the government because a lot of those voters pay his fees. So is he allowed to praise them?
I think he should do. He has a great job. He gets to talk about football all day. I mean, you know, and I think if he clearly cares passionately about these issues, I think if you do that, I think, you know, he could go work for BT or he can go work for CBS or he can go work for Amazon and he can earn a great deal of money and he can talk about it. I frankly feel that the BBC needs to be rigorously impartial on this. But I would say again, just on the Tim Davie thing, you said it was a farce. Tim Davie introduced these changes. He then suspended the guy, frankly, because he thought he'd breached them, whereas he hadn't.
Yeah, it was
the guidelines he introduced. I just think...
It was handled badly.
But he must have known what he was doing was going to lead to this outcome. Surely it was completely inexplicable.
Lloyd completely agrees with you, and he said Aaron's absolutely right. Davie should be sacked. David said, thank you very much for giving me a laugh, stating that you reckon the BBC are impartial. Ha ha, yes, of course they are, Michelle, not. Lots of you. Someone else saying, Michelle, will you pack it in talking about Lineker? You sound like a broken record. I'll tell you what, I'll talk about them very quickly because look at the time, it flies when you're having fun. I'm talking about muffins. Strange goings on. Pamphlets being issued to nurseries, getting teachers to bake muffins with different fruits in it to relate to the kids. That is a story for another day because it'll raise your eyebrows, that is for sure. But for tonight, Charlotte and Aaron, thank you very much for your wonderful company and thank you guys at home for yours as well. Flown by tonight, hasn't it always? Doctors and nurses should be free to UK citizens, but they should have to stay for a minimum of 10 years in the NHS, says Paul. Oh, well, Michelle, patients will wait, I'm sure, until they're back. I don't think they will. That is all I've got time for. Nigel, up next.
Hello and welcome to your evening weather with me, Luke Mile. Now, as we head through this evening, it is going to turn colder across the United Kingdom. We've got rain heading southwards with frost, ice and snow to follow. And that's down to this cold front. You can see we've had tightly packed isobars today. That's brought a lot of strong wind around across the country. But as that cold front slips its way to the southeast, you can see the colder air digging in behind. Snow and ice warnings in force as we head through tonight and into tomorrow. Showers will affect northern and western areas, but it's this band of rain, sleet and snow that pushes its way southwards, giving snow up over the higher grounds and temperatures dropping in its wake. Sub-zero across the north with widespread frost and ice. So a very cold start to the day here. We'll continue to see those wintry showers feeding in, falling as snow to fairly low levels across the far north, but generally as we head into northern England, Northern Ireland and North Wales, it's mostly above 100 to 200 metres. But for the south through Tuesday, a different feeling day, a lot more in the way of sunshine around. Still quite a keen breeze, but this time coming in from the northwest, which will make it feel somewhat colder than it has done today. Through Tuesday evening then, we continue to see the rain, sleet and snow tracking its way southeastwards. Very cold air tucking in behind the blue, really exploding on the map there. It's turning much colder with a widespread frost as we start Wednesday morning. Temperatures typically in our